The Twits Part 3. The Great Upside Down Monkey Circus. Now for the monkeys. The 4 monkeys in the cage, in the garden, were all one family. They were Mugglewump and his wife and their 2 children. But what on earth were Mr. and Mrs. Twit doing with monkeys in their garden? Well, in the old days, they had both worked in a circus as monkey trainers. They used to teach monkeys to do tricks and to dress up in human clothes and to smoke pipes and all the rest of that nonsense. Today, although they were retired, Mr. Twit still wanted to train monkeys. It was a great dream that one day he would own the first great upside-down monkey circus in the world. That meant that the monkeys had to do everything upside down. They had to dance upside down on their hands with their feet in the air. They had to play football upside down. They had to balance one on top of the other upside down with Mugglewump at the bottom and the smallest baby monkey at the very top. They even had to eat and drink upside down, and that is not easy big thing to do because the food and water has to go up your throat instead of down. In fact, it's almost impossible. But the monkeys simply had to do it, otherwise they got nothing. All this sounds pretty silly to you and me. It sounded pretty silly to the monkeys too. They absolutely hated having to do this upside down nonsense day after day. It made them giddy standing on their heads for hours on end. Sometimes the 2 small monkey children would faint with so much blood going to their heads. But Mr. Twit didn't care about that. He kept them practicing for 6 hours every day. And if they didn't do as they were told, Mrs. Twit would soon come running with her beastly stick. The roly-poly bird to the rescue. Mugglewump and his family longed to escape from the cage in Mr. Twit's garden and go back to the African jungle where they came from. They hated Mr. and Mrs. Twit for making their lives so miserable. They also hated them for what they did to the birds every Tuesday and Wednesday. "Fly away, birds," they used to shout, jumping about in the cage and waving their arms. "Don't sit on the big dead tree. It's just been smeared all over with sticky glue. Go and sit somewhere else." But they were English birds and they couldn't understand the weird African language the monkeys spoke, so they took no notice and went on using the big dead tree and getting caught for Mrs. Twit's bird pie. Then one day a truly magnificent bird flew down out of the sky and landed on the monkey cage. "Good heavens," cried all the monkeys together. "It's the roly-poly bird. What on earth are you doing over here in England, roly-poly bird?" Like the monkeys, the roly-poly bird came from Africa and he spoke the same language as they did. "I've come for a holiday," said the roly-poly bird. "I like to travel." He fluffed his marvellous coloured feathers and looked down rather grandly at the monkeys. "For most people," he went on, "flying away on holiday is very expensive, but I can fly anywhere in the world for nothing." "Do you know how to talk to these English birds?" Mugglewump asked him. "Of course I do," said Roly-Poly Bird. "It's no good going to a country and not knowing the language." "Then we must hurry," said Mugglewump. "Today is Tuesday, and over there you can already see the revolting Mr. Twit up the ladder painting sticky glue on the branches of the big dead tree. This evening when the birds come in to roost, you must warn them not to perch on that tree, or they will be made into bird pie." That evening, the roly-poly bird flew around the big dead tree, singing out, "There's sticky stick stuff all over the tree. If you land in the branches, you'll never get free. So fly away, stay up high, or you'll finish up tomorrow in a hot bird pie." No bird pie for Mr. Twit. The next morning, when Mr. Twit came out with his huge basket to catch the birds from the big dead tree, there wasn't a single one on it. They were all sitting on top of the monkey cage. The roly-poly bird was there as well, and Mugglewump and his family were inside the cage, and the whole lot of them were laughing at Mr. Twit. Still no bird pie for Mr. Twit. Mr. Twit wasn't going to wait another week for his bird pie supper. He loved bird pie. It was his favourite meal. So that very same day he went after the birds again. This time he smeared all the top bars of the monkey cage with sticky glue as well as the branches of the big dead tree. "Now I'll get you," he said, "whichever one you sit on." The monkeys crouched inside the cage watching all this, and later on, when the roly-poly bird came swooping in for an evening chat, they shouted, "Don't land on our cage, roly-poly bird! It's covered in sticky glue, so is the tree." And that evening, as the sun went down and all the birds came in again to roost, The roly-poly bird flew round and round the monkey cage and the big dead tree, singing out his warning. There's sticky stuff now on the cage and the tree. If you land on either, you'll never get free. So fly away, stay up high, or you'll finish up tomorrow in a hot bird pie. Mr. and Mrs. Twit go off to buy guns. The next morning, when Mr. Twit came out with his huge basket, not a single bird was sitting on either the monkey cage or the big dead tree. They were all happily perched on the roof of Mr. Twit's house. The roly-poly bird was up there as well, and the monkeys were in the cage, and the whole lot of them were hooting with laughter at Mr. Twit. "I'll wipe that silly laugh off your beaks," Mr. Twit screamed at the birds. "I'll get you next time, you filthy feathery frumps. I'll wring your necks, the whole lot of you, and and have you bubbling in the pot for bird pie before this day is out." "How are you going to do that?" asked Mrs. Twit, who had come outside to see what all the noise was about. "I won't have you smearing sticky glue all over the roof of our house." Mr. Twit got very excited. "I've got a great idea," he cried. He didn't bother to keep his voice down because he didn't think the monkeys could understand. "We'll go into town right away and we'll buy a gun each," he shouted. "How's that?" "Brilliant!" cried Mrs. Twit, grinning and showing her long yellow teeth. "We'll buy those big shotguns that spray out about 50 bullets or more with each bang." "Exactly," said Mr. Twit. "Lock up the house while I go and make sure the monkeys are safely shut away." Mr. Twit went over to the monkey cage. "Attention!" he barked in his fearsome monkey trainer's voice. "Upside down, all of you, and jump to it. One on top of the other. Quick, get on with it, or you'll feel Mrs. Twit stick across your backsides." Obediently, the poor monkeys stood on their hands and clambered one on top of the other, with Muggerwump at the bottom and the smallest child at the very top. "Now, stay there till we come back," Mr. Twit ordered. "Don't you dare move and don't overbalance. When we return in 2 or 3 hours' time, I shall expect to find you all in exactly the same position you are now. You understand?" With that, Mr. Twit marched away. Mrs. Twit went with him, and the monkeys were left alone with the birds. Muggerwump has an idea. As soon as Mr. and Mrs. Twit had disappeared down the road, the monkeys all flipped back onto their feet the right way up. "Quick, get the key," Muggerwump called out to the roly-poly bird, who was still sitting on the roof of the house. "What key?" shouted roly-poly bird. "The key to the door of our cage," cried Muggerwump. "It's hanging on a nail in the workshed. That's where he always puts it." The roly-poly bird flew down and came back with the key in his beak. Muggerwump reached a hand through the bars of the cage and took the key. He put it in the lock and turned it. The door opened. All 4 monkeys leapt out together. "We're free!" cried the 2 little ones. "Where shall we go, Dad? Where shall we hide?" "Don't get excited," said Muggerwump. "Calm down, everyone. Before we escape from this beastly place, we have one important thing to do." "What?" they asked him. "We're going to turn those terrible twits upside down." "We're going to do what?" they cried. "You must be joking, Dad." "I'm not joking," Muggerwump said. "We're going to turn both Mr. and Mrs. Twit upside down with their legs in the air." "Don't be ridiculous," the roly-poly bird said. "How can we possibly turn those maggoty monsters upside down?" We can, cried Muggerwump. "We are going to make them stand on their heads for hours and hours, perhaps forever. Let them see what it feels like for a change." "How?" said the roly-poly bird. "Just tell me how." Muggerwump laid his head on one side, and a tiny twinkling little smile touched the corners of his mouth. "Now and again," he said, "but not very often. I have a brilliant idea. This is one of them. Follow me, my friends. Follow me." He scampered off towards the house, and the 3 other monkeys and the roly-poly bird went after him. "Buckets and paintbrushes," cried Muggerwump. "That's what we want next. There are plenty in the workshed. Hurry up, everyone. Get a bucket and a paintbrush." Inside Mr. Twit's workshop, there was an enormous barrel of hug-tight sticky glue, the stuff used for catching birds. "Fill your buckets," Muggerwump ordered. "We are now going into the big house." Mr. Twit had hidden the key to the front door under the mat, and Muggerwump had seen her do it, so it was easy for them to get in. In they went, all 4 monkeys with their buckets of sticky glue. Then came the roly-poly bird flying in after them with a bucket in his beak and a paintbrush in his claw.